Yes, yes, finally. It's the first time that Second City has had an all-female identifying cast. The time has passed for things to be status quo.
You can feel how important it is to the audience.
It is absolutely time to hear stories from different people.
It's been a long time coming for a show like this. It feels like now we have a voice. She the People was the first sketch comedy show that I was a part of that felt like a rock concert. It felt like they were the Spice Girls of the comedy scene. It's Second City's first all-female sketch review. It takes a look at the trials and tribulations of being a woman.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Next week skating.
And the other thing you said.
It also kind of hilariously shows a funhouse mirror to all those things. So, well, there's a lot of wild and rough stuff about being a lady these days. It also really empowers the audience. There's a lot of cathartic joy that comes from watching this show.
Most of the scenes represent the female experience or female identifying experience, but there's universal comedy in every single one of the sketches, so it doesn't cut out men or non-binary people or anything like that. It's comedy for everyone, just done by women. What a concept.
The show's been really successful because we're finally hearing stories about life and about experiences, about frustrations, about politics, etc., except it's just coming from a woman's voice. And there are a lot of people like, thank you for saying something that I've never gotten to hear said for me.
In comedy, it has often been from a male perspective. So a lot of times female comedians are being portrayed as a wife or a girlfriend. And it's like, no, we can be characters. We can be in a dinosaur suit. We can do a sketch where you're just screaming for 5 minutes. I think it's important now to be able to show from our perspective, our POV, sketches that maybe in the past wouldn't have worked because people maybe didn't take it as seriously.
I get the question of like how the business has changed for women a lot. I don't know if the business has changed or women have changed in terms of like, well, I am going to work here, whether you like it or not. When I started out in the 90s, there weren't that many women performing on stage, but even with my all-female sketch troupe, which at the time was a little unusual, there was only a few others, we made sure that we had hosts that were female, we had female stand-ups, we had musicians that were women, so we were giving women opportunity as well, and I think that that is crucial.
In the Baroness writing room, where we're primarily women, when you bring up an idea and you pitch it around the room, you know it's a good idea when people say, oh, I've had that experience, I know what you're talking about, you know, me too, that's great, and everyone sort of builds on the idea you come in with. But if you're in a room of people who don't reflect back to your experience and have a completely different gender and approach to comedy and whatever, when you bring up an idea, it doesn't mean that it's not good, but you just don't have that same feedback, so it's super important. So for women, I think it has changed because as more women move into positions of power and as there are more women creators and more women in shows, then it allows for more women to come up with them or beside them.
Both Baroness and Working Moms have had an impact on comedy in this country. It's allowed women to see that they can do it, that they can front their own shows, that they can be successful doing it too. The fact that both shows have an incredible amount of female talent behind the camera as well just helps the whole industry grow, and that's important.
When I started doing stand-up 20 years ago, I was in Montreal and there were literally like 2.5 women doing stand-up. And I say 2.5 because like one of them was rarely there. I remember once being in a comedy club and seeing another woman do a show, and then she was really funny. And then I was like staring at her across the room, and my boyfriend at the time was like, you look like 2 monkeys in the jungle who have just spotted one of their own. I think it's just Joan Rivers, Phyllis Diller, people like me 20 years ago, just keeping at it and kind of not agreeing to shut up. And obviously, there's a political shift at hand.
I will say that the Me Too movement did knock down a lot of doors and made people in positions of power not only be open to bringing more diverse voices onto stages and onto screens, but feeling like a real fire had been lit under them and that they needed to.
Now is the time where everyone can have stage time and TV time and editorial time. And I think this show helps break through the concept that women don't belong or that women aren't funny. I will fight anyone who says that women aren't funny. I will fight them. I'm from Brampton. I will fight you.
We have to step outside of our comfort zone and start taking risks, and it seems silly to think of a risk of being like a storytelling from different points of view and different perspectives so that we can all recognize how similar we are in that we're people and we look for love and we look for acceptance. And something like She the People made me realize it's not just for one kind of people.
It's just, I think, the beginning of what comedy can be in the future, whether it is an all-female identifying show or an all-queer show or an all-POC show. I think those things are especially important with what's been going on in our world and in our country and in our country to the south, and I think it's just the right time.
It is so important to have diversity and inclusion in comedy, just to like shed the light on the fact that everybody is funny. I think that's a really important thing, and it's important to have more shows that are happening, that are live out there, because a lot of times audience members, the first time you see that happening on stage, it makes you click. Something happens in your brain where you're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility, because we're so fed by the media that comedy looks a certain way.
Still today, when you think about a comedian, you think about a man. That's what most people think. We are still seen as second-class comedians. So this is our challenge now. When we are, let's say, in a showcase, we have to kill it twice as hard. So people go, oh, she is fucking good. You have to kill it. You have to absolutely murder it, right? And I would say that even for a person of color and someone like me who has English as their second language, I have to absolutely kill the audience. Otherwise, people won't even listen to me, right? So that's a challenge still for women.
People ask me, like, what's your advice for young women kind of coming up in this world? And my answer that I always give is quite crass, which is you have to play with your dick out. You have to play as hard as the boys. You have to play like your dick is as big as theirs, which I know is a really crass way of putting it. But it's really just about, like, if you don't feel confident, fake it till you make it. You have just as much of a right to be there as every one of them. You're just as good as every one of them. You just have to make sure that they know how you will be treated.
Women are gaining confidence and taking up space, which I think is very important, without being called a bitch. Because a lot of women who would be like, I'm here to perform, here's my set, this is what I want to do, will get a lot of comments from people going, wow, that woman's a real bitch. You're not a bitch if you are confident and you're funny and you want to take up space. So I say, take up space.
Don't always listen. Listen to people, but don't take them at their word. You know, you hear things like no one wants improv, or no one wants sketch, or no one wants women in their 40s, whatever. If you're like confident, you know what's happening, and you've got a line on some comedic truth, then go with that. Trust yourself and your contemporaries over some expert who says no one wants to see women in their 40s.
We're still on a journey of acceptance and of people listening, and I think there are still people out there that don't want to hear it and don't want to be a part of it. As much as we build these safe spaces, there are spaces that you don't feel as safe, and I think that's because of those people that don't want to listen to you, don't want to hear your voice. For me personally, I think that's a huge issue, is people who just still don't want to listen.
My hopes are that She the People is just the beginning, as opposed to, great, we've heard from women, thank you, and now we'll just go back to kind of what we've always been used to.
I hope in 10 to 15 years that they'll be looking at the show and thinking, wow, that's hilarious. What an absurd time it was to be a woman, because things will be far better. That's what I hope.
I hope it is something that inspires marginalized people to say, I can speak my voice, I can be up there, I can tell my stories, and that this isn't just like a trend. Because right now I feel like women are in, people of color are in, and I want this to be more of a norm and not like a cool coat style, like this cool coat.
To work with such talented women, to have audiences night after night stand up and cheer, and to have things resonate on an emotional level, on an intellectual level, and on a silly level. To be able to be a part of that change, I will never forget this experience.